The ancient skyline of Jerusalem, a beacon of history and faith for millennia, was suddenly and violently shattered. The night air, once filled with the sounds of prayer and quiet contemplation, was torn apart by the deafening roar of explosions. The piercing wail of air raid sirens echoed through the narrow streets, a chilling symphony of impending danger. War had erupted, a full-scale conflict unleashed between Israel and Iran, shattering the fragile peace of the Middle East. Decades of simmering tensions had finally boiled over into open hostility. The city, usually steeped in quiet reverence, a place of pilgrimage and spiritual reflection for people of all faiths, instantly became a battleground, modern missiles streaking across the night sky, their fiery trails painting a terrifying picture against the backdrop of ancient stone. The Iron Dome, Israel's defense system, worked tirelessly, intercepting incoming rockets in a dazzling display of technological warfare. This brought the distant conflict, previously confined to the realms of geopolitics and proxy wars, directly to millions of doorsteps, transforming homes into potential targets and neighborhoods into war zones. For decades, Israel and Iran had fought in the shadows, engaging in covert operations, supporting opposing sides in regional conflicts, and waging a silent war of espionage and cyber attacks. Now, the conflict is open, direct, a dangerous escalation that threatens to engulf the entire region. The rules of engagement have changed, and the consequences are frighteningly unpredictable. The world watched in alarm, glued to news reports and social media feeds, as the situation rapidly deteriorated. Each side escalated the conflict with devastating missile launches and retaliatory strikes, pushing the boundaries of acceptable warfare. This pushed the region, already teetering on the brink, closer to a devastating abyss of all-out war, threatening to destabilize the entire Middle East and beyond. In Tel Aviv and Tehran, the bustling hearts of both nations, chaos reigned. Shattered buildings stood as grim reminders of the destructive power unleashed. Burning vehicles littered the streets, monuments to the ferocity of the attacks, and overwhelmed emergency services struggled to cope with the sheer scale of the devastation and the constant influx of casualties. The trauma is deep, etched into the collective psyche of both nations, leaving scars that may never fully heal. Ordinary people, families, and communities now face the terrifying reality of war at home, their lives irrevocably altered by the conflict. This story will meticulously trace the sequence of strikes and retaliations, mapping the escalation of violence and the strategic decisions that led to this point. We will examine the devastating human cost, the lives lost, the families torn apart, and the enduring suffering inflicted upon innocent civilians. We will amplify the voices of those caught in the crossfire, sharing their personal stories of resilience, loss, and the struggle to survive amidst the chaos. The region stands on a knife's edge, teetering precariously between peace and utter devastation, with the potential for far-reaching consequences. The future remains uncertain, shrouded in a fog of war and political maneuvering, leaving the fate of millions hanging in the balance. And the hope for peace, once a distant possibility, now seems more fragile and elusive than ever before, threatened by the relentless cycle of violence and retribution. So, the crisis began with a bold Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear sites and military sites in the early hours of Friday. This was no covert operation. Israel struck deep, targeting key infrastructure and senior military leaders, signaling a dramatic escalation. The operation was a calculated risk, intended to neutralize what Israel calls an existential threat from Iran's nuclear ambitions. Years of warnings culminated in this preemptive strike, shattering the unwritten rules of their shadow war. The attack left Iran reeling, its leadership shaken, and the region bracing for retaliation. By crossing this threshold, Israel gambled that deterrence would outweigh provocation. But the world knew Iran's response was only a matter of time. Following the initial strike, the world held its breath, anticipating the inevitable response. Iran's answer was swift and overwhelming, a calculated display of force intended to send a clear message. The scale of the retaliation was designed to leave no room for doubt about Iran's resolve. Under the cloak of darkness, a barrage of missiles streaked across Israel's skies before dawn. The sheer number of projectiles created a spectacle of light and shadow, a terrifying display of military might aimed at the heart of the Jewish state. The piercing wail of sirens shattered the early morning calm, sending millions scrambling for shelter. Families were torn from their beds, rushing into bunkers and safe rooms, the fear of impending impact etched on their faces. The ground trembled as explosions rocked Tel Aviv, Israel's bustling economic and cultural center. The night sky lit up with the orange glow of fireballs, a stark reminder of the vulnerability of urban life in the face of modern warfare. And most symbolically, Jerusalem, the holy city revered by 3 major religions, was not spared. The attack on Jerusalem carried a weight far beyond its military significance, striking at the very heart of Israeli identity and historical narrative. Israel's Iron Dome, the nation's advanced air defense system, sprang into action, intercepting many threats with remarkable precision, the sky filled with the contrails of interceptor missiles, a technological shield attempting to ward off the incoming storm. But despite the Iron Dome's effectiveness, some missiles broke through, finding their mark on the ground. The reality of the attack was undeniable, as the defenses were not impenetrable. The impact resulted in causing destruction and panic, leaving behind scenes of devastation and chaos. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and the streets were filled with the sounds of sirens and the cries of the injured. The attack was a clear message broadcast not just to Israel, but to the entire world. It was a demonstration of power, a declaration of intent, and a warning against further aggression. Iran would retaliate with force, making good on its long-standing threats against its regional adversary. The message was unmistakable. Any attack on Iranian interests would be met with a swift and decisive response. The missiles were deliberately targeting major population centers, aiming to inflict maximum damage and sow widespread fear. The choice of targets underscored the strategic nature of the attack, designed to cripple Israel's infrastructure and economy. Military analysts called it a major escalation, a dangerous turning point in the already volatile Middle East. The attack shattered the fragile status quo and raised the specter of a wider regional conflict. The conflict was no longer a proxy war, fought through surrogates and shadowy operations. The gloves were off, and the 2 nations were now engaged in a direct and open confrontation. This was a direct state-on-state conflict, a dangerous precedent that threatened to destabilize the entire region. The rules of engagement had changed, and the consequences were uncertain. The night's violence marked a point of no return, a moment that would forever alter the relationship between Iran and Israel. The attack had crossed a threshold, making de-escalation increasingly difficult. The event saw both nations crossing red lines that had held for decades, shattering the fragile balance of power in the Middle East. The long-simmering tensions had finally boiled over, unleashing a new era of conflict. The rivalry was now open, a full-blown confrontation with no clear end in sight. The stakes were higher than ever, and the potential for further escalation loomed large. The stakes higher than ever, as both nations mobilized their forces and prepared for what might come next. The region braced itself for a protracted conflict with potentially devastating consequences. For Israelis, the threat of missile attacks became an immediate, terrifying reality, a constant reminder of the dangers they faced. The sense of security had been shattered, replaced by a pervasive fear of the unknown. The region braced for what might come next, as the world watched with growing apprehension. The future of the Middle East hung in the balance, with the spectre of all-out war looming large. The cost of escalation is measured in shattered lives. In Israel, 3 people were killed and dozens wounded as missiles struck homes and streets. Iran suffered even greater losses. Over 78 dead, hundreds injured, many of them civilians near targeted sites. Hospitals in both countries overflowed with casualties, families desperate for news of loved ones. The destruction is immense, but the psychological scars run deeper. Safety and normalcy have vanished. Each casualty is a personal tragedy, a reminder that ordinary people pay the price for political decisions. The numbers are grim, but the human stories behind them are even more devastating. In the aftermath, leaders on both sides delivered defiant, uncompromising messages. Israel's prime minister vowed further action, accusing Iran of targeting civilians and promising a strong response. Iran's leaders, reeling from their losses, pledged severe retaliation, framing their actions as self-defense. The rhetoric was escalatory, locking both nations into public positions that make de-escalation difficult. These statements fueled the crisis, signaling to allies and enemies alike that neither side intends to back down. The war of words now runs parallel to the war of missiles, pushing the region closer to a wider confrontation. For ordinary people, war is a daily terror. In Israel, sirens send families racing to shelters, hearts pounding as they wait for the next explosion. Parents struggle to comfort children, routines are shattered, and every loud noise brings panic. In Iran, the fear is just as real. Explosions shake neighborhoods, and uncertainty reigns as information is scarce. Living near military targets turns homes into front lines, safety into a memory. Across both nations, the shared experience is fear, loss, and a desperate hope for peace. The conflict is lived most intensely by those far from the decision-makers. Their voices, longing for normalcy, are often drowned out by the drumbeat of war. The Israel-Iran conflict threatens to ignite the entire Middle East. Regional powers and proxy groups Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria and Iraq could be drawn in, opening new fronts. The risk of a multi-front war is real, with the potential for catastrophic escalation. The global economy is at stake. The Strait of Hormuz, vital for oil shipments, could be disrupted, sending energy prices soaring. Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE face their own security dilemmas, caught between warring giants. Diplomats worldwide are scrambling to prevent a regional explosion. The nightmare, a chain reaction that engulfs the region in unprecedented destruction. The world is watching, alarmed and anxious. The UN and major powers have called for restraint, urging both sides to step back from the brink. The US, Israel's closest ally, is walking a diplomatic tightrope, supporting Israel while urging caution to avoid wider war. Back-channel talks with Iran aim to prevent further escalation, but tensions remain high. Europe, Russia and China have all called for calm, each with their own interests at stake. Arab nations fear the conflict will undo years of fragile diplomatic progress. Despite global pressure, only the leaders in Jerusalem and Tehran can halt the violence. The world holds its breath, hoping reason will prevail. The Middle East stands on the edge, a precarious position teetering between stability and utter chaos. Decades of unresolved conflicts, simmering tensions, and deep-seated mistrust have converged to create a powder keg, threatening to explode at any moment. The region, a cradle of civilization, now finds itself grappling with the specter of widespread war. Of a devastating war, a conflict that could engulf nations and destabilize the entire global order. Military build-ups are escalating, with each nation bolstering its defenses and preparing for the worst. The air is thick with anticipation, a sense of impending doom hanging heavy over the land. The old shadow conflict, fought in the shadows and through proxies, is now an open, dangerous confrontation. Missiles streak across the sky, and the echoes of explosions reverberate through the streets. The rules of engagement have been discarded, replaced by a brutal and unforgiving struggle for dominance. Each new attack, each act of aggression, pushes the region closer to the brink. The cycle of violence seems endless, with retaliation begetting further retaliation in a never-ending spiral of destruction. And every threat makes de-escalation harder as trust erodes and the desire for revenge intensifies. High-stakes meetings are being held behind closed doors, where defense ministers and military officials grapple with the daunting task of preventing all-out war. This is raising the risk of a regional catastrophe, a conflagration that could consume the entire Middle East and beyond. The consequences would be devastating, with countless lives lost and entire societies shattered. Yet amid the darkness, a glimmer of hope persists. There is a sliver of hope, a fragile but persistent belief that peace is still possible. It's the hope of global unity against war, a collective determination to prevent the unthinkable. and the shared humanity of those who long for peace, the ordinary people who yearn for a future free from violence and fear. The sheer scale of potential destruction, the unimaginable devastation that war would unleash, may itself deter further escalation. The awareness of the catastrophic consequences might just be the factor that prevents the crossing of the point of no return. Intense diplomatic efforts offer a possible off-ramp, a chance to step back from the abyss and find a path towards reconciliation. But it all hinges on whether leaders are willing to take it, whether they can summon the courage and wisdom to choose peace over conflict. The choice between war, with its inevitable suffering and loss, and peace, with its promise of stability and prosperity, rests with a handful of decision-makers, those who hold the fate of the region in their hands. The world hopes they choose restraint, that they prioritize diplomacy over aggression. Dialogue and the difficult work of building peace is the only viable path forward. The alternative is too catastrophic to imagine, a nightmare scenario that must be avoided at all costs.